Hello, everyone. I'm here with Ben Wisbey, and I am really excited about this opportunity to talk to Ben because Ben and I connected via LinkedIn, and he came across as someone who's very knowledgeable in the space of productivity, especially in terms of this device that he is involved with at this present moment called Pylot. But before I get Ben to tell you a little bit more about that, it's probably worthwhile to just spend a little bit of time just trying to get to know him as a person and what drove him to being involved in this exciting project. So Ben, over to you. I mean, what got you started? I mean, what got you involved in learning more about productivity in the first place?
Yeah, thanks, Ivan, and good to have a chat. I've always been a bit of a productivity nerd. So my background is as a performance scientist, so mainly working with elite athletes, and my specialty was being able to monitor those athletes and be able to use that data and information to give them feedback on how they might perform, how they should train, etc., etc. So there was always this bit of a fascination with data, and at the same time, I was quite entrepreneurial, so I've always had my own businesses, and those two together led me to always doing a lot of monitoring about my own time and my own interest in productivity, and dating back for way too long. I've got details on all sorts of things to do with my work that most people would probably think is a bit redundant. But yeah, I guess that over the years that's gradually evolved, and then one day I was sitting here working after hours and hours of meetings, and I was thinking, right, I've got to do my important work, and I was struggling to get into that groove. And it kept thinking, am I fatigued or am I just being lazy? And that idea kept coming up over and over for me, which is what led to the original idea behind Pylot, which is what we're now working on. So it was actually trying to answer a personal question that I had to help me with my own productivity.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'm curious to dive more into that. But before I do, I have to ask a question in terms of the athletes and the sports people that you work with before. What is their definition of productivity? Because a lot of times the thing is, and a lot of the people who are listening to this interview, they'll be equating productivity to workplace productivity, right? Sitting in front of the office, in front of the desk, or their computer, trying to get as much done as possible. So what is that for productivity for sports stars and athletes?
Yeah, and I think this is the beauty of sport, is that's actually very clear. Performance in sport is a very win-loss scenario. So the main sports that I historically worked with were initially professional Olympic cyclists, which is very easy to see, whether they've won, they've got a place, or how they've performed, and then to look at some of their the data, that they had from that, and then transitioned into professional team sports, such as working with AFL teams, and it's very similar there. You can clearly see, well, did you win or lose, which is very different to work, right? Like you get to the end of a work day, and you have this feeling of whether you're being productive or not, but it's a little bit less tangible.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the beauty of sport. Things are quite clear. And my role in that was quite small, which was monitoring the athletes and determining how ready they were to do their optimal physical performance.
Yeah.
I was using data to try and predict that, and otherwise go back and give them recommendations on modifications they could make to get to that point.
Yeah, and you can see with all sports, elite athletes these days, they're running around with those monitors and sensors, on their back or attached to them somehow, right? And it's incredible to see the amount of data that we're actually getting from those little devices these days. And you spoke about the Olympic cyclists. I read about the British cycling team and how successful they are in terms of that data that they use, and to really narrow it down to the minuscule little things that they needed to adjust in order for them to be as successful as they were in terms of the Olympics.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you definitely can over monitor, right? There's so much can monitor in sport, and especially a sport like cycling, which is relatively mechanical compared to a team sport. There's a lot of data you can get, and as a guy in that space, it's a lot of fun, but at the same time, you also have to remember the human element. And there's psychological components that are very important as well, which are far more difficult to monitor.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's probably a good segue. Look, we can talk about sports all day. You're talking to another sports geek here, and I love my cricket. I love my golf. But we'll come back to that a little bit later, I think. But I really want to actually delve a little bit deeper in terms of how that data-driven aspect of what you deem is really important at this present moment. How does that help an executive? Talk to someone like myself, or talk to someone sitting in front of their desk listening to this interview at the moment. What's important about data to them in terms of their own productivity?
Yeah, so I think firstly, being able to try and, because productivity itself is difficult to measure, especially for a knowledge worker, one of the key things to look at is how can we get our body, both physically and mentally, into a position where we can perform our best. And I think in order to do that, it's worthwhile measuring a few things. And those things are probably not rocket science to work out, so are we having good sleep? Are we having enough of it? Are we going to bed at the right time? Are we getting enough exercise? Are we eating well enough? All of these things that are generally related to health, recovery, and general wellness are really the key to being able to help us maximize our performance consistently. And I think that's where most knowledge workers are very similar to athletes, in that you can't just have one great day and everything's then going to work out. You need to be able to perform day in and day out in order to be actually able to achieve your goals and achieve what you might define as success. I guess the difference then is, well, what is actually being able to measure the outcome of that performance for work? And in my case, you look at things like hours, you look at the types of apps you use for different hours. For a software developer, you might look at the code you've written or the bugs you've solved. So there's different specific ones for each cases, but that's a far more difficult measurement to assess than what it is in sport, for sure. The outcome side.
Yeah, and that's so true. I think that the starting point is that there are things that are measurable. There are things that people need to actually get their heads around in terms of what would contribute to high performance. And in my coaching work that I do, I talk to my executives that I coach about, the high performance hormones that they need to be aware of. Simply things like, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and the endorphins that are going to really help them, be that much more effective at work. So I'm sure that you come across lots of people that get to Friday and just absolutely die in a heap because they're so exhausted, mentally and physically, because they haven't actually taken good care of themselves and their bodies, from a mental and physical perspective, right?
100%. And I think not every week's the same. I actually, found this out personally a few weeks ago, where I'm very conscious of all of these things, and, quite conscious that this is a marathon more than a sprint, using golf analogy, and making sure that I can have 5 good days without actually overdoing any one of them. But a few weeks ago, I had that exact thing, whereas, got to a Thursday, was quite tired. Our own product, which I can talk about in a while, was telling me I was fatigued. I just got another hour of work to do here. I'll just push through. So I got that done. And then on Friday was just a mess. Then it was just the next day, I was just really struggled and was almost ineffective as a result. And I guess it really highlighted to me, from a personal perspective, that supported a lot of the research I've read, which is once you go into that fatigue state, whether it's mental or physical, it's quite difficult to then recover quickly and be able to come back and sustain ongoing performance. And, if I do that once every week and I lose a day of productive work a week, then I'm probably not going to achieve my longer term goals.
Yeah. And people don't realize, the thing is that they, just because they're spending that extra hour or extra day doing something, it doesn't mean that they're actually doing it effectively. And in actual fact, I've come from, training lots of professionals in the financial planning space. where I know that because of their mental fatigue, they are more likely to make a mistake, and they're more likely to make errors that could be quite costly. And that is something that people need to be aware of. Just because you're doing work, it doesn't mean that you're doing good work.
100%. And I think that maybe that's something we learn as we get a little bit older. But I guess that my vision now is very much of, if I could get 5 hours of really good quality work done a day, then that's a success. So sometimes that might take 8 hours because I need breaks, you need to get away, etc.
Yeah.
But having that goal of quality work as opposed to volume of work really becomes the guiding principle, as opposed to just grinding it out for 12 hours a day.
Yeah, and hence one of the beautiful things that I've seen come out of COVID, and there hasn't been that many great things coming out of COVID, right? But one of the great things that have come out of COVID is this whole transition with a lot of workplaces to flexible working arrangements for their employees, giving them that ability to control when they do work. I just get the feeling though that a lot of people are still not getting it right. They don't understand that, just because they can do work anytime during the day, it doesn't mean that they need to do 10 hours continuously, as you say, in a very bad way. How do they actually structure their time so that they can actually spend time doing deep focus work, and properly, doing that work well without any distractions? Or how do they make sure that you have your body in the right way, where you understand your circadian rhythms and what times during the day that you work best? Is that something that you have found in your work and the device that you've come up with in Pylot?
Yeah, 100%. I think you really nailed that one there. And every individual is different. So, we all generally get the feeling that we're either a morning or an afternoon or an evening person, but being able to objectively get some insights there is really interesting. So that's probably, to me, so I guess to give a quick intro to the product we're working on, because it'll lead me to answer that question. We're working on or about to launch a product called Pylot, which monitors cognitive performance. So it uses EEG, which measures brainwave activity, and it uses another sensor to measure heart rate variability. And that basically allows us to look at both mental fatigue, which we discussed about a moment ago, but also this state around flow, or basically your relaxed concentration state, which is what we found to be most associated with a good task outcome, or that performance we were talking about earlier. So using our product with Pylot, what we've been able to identify is different people have different times of day where their flow is generally higher. So as an example, for me personally, I love getting up and working at 6 o'clock in the morning. And that's not for everyone, but I know that by sort of 9 or 10, that's my peak point, and I want to make the most of that. Come 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then there's no point in me doing a whole lot that's going to be involving key tasks, because that's not when I'm going to do them best. Whereas one of my colleagues, he's quite the opposite. He's very much a night owl. He's a software developer. He'll get in there and he'll happily work away for 3 hours in blocks without becoming fatigued in those evenings. Whereas for me, it's all about the morning, 90-minute blocks, and at that point, generally the fatigue starts to kick in. So being able to learn those things about you individually allows you to structure your day more sensibly. And I think that, as you said a moment ago, COVID's given a lot of people the opportunity to assess this and maybe structure their day, instead of just being 8 hours in the office, but to think about how they can structure their day to get the best outcome. So that might be, say in my case, hopping up and working early and then doing some exercise later in the morning as a bit of a break. Or it may be, that somebody who's that night owl actually sleeps in a little bit and they're still, just waking up at 9 o'clock because they're using that peak hour in the evening. So I think that's really valuable to getting the most out of your day.
Yeah, and here's an interesting thing, Ben. The thing is that I always thought that I was a night owl, right? But the thing is that once I started looking at this properly, I actually came to the conclusion that I was actually a morning person, and I was forcing myself to do stuff at night that I don't think that I was really that productive at doing. And so that in itself, in terms of the realization, changed everything that I knew about myself. So I'll give you an example. The thing is that, I used to, commute to the office every day, and obviously as part of that, you have to get yourself up, you have to get yourself ready, and then you have to get yourself on the train, and so on and so forth, right? And so without having to do that anymore, with the ability to work from home and whatnot, that all changed for me. So that assessment as to whether or not I was a night owl, I actually started looking at it, and I said, hey, look, hang on, my mind is actually mentally alert first thing in the morning, a lot like you, Ben. And what that meant was that valuable time, my what we call the deep focus time, where we can actually nut out the most important work that we have, the top priorities, the urgent and important stuff that we talk about. That was valuable territory for me, valuable block in my calendar. So I say in jest, but also seriously, the aspect of me not having to brush my teeth, shower, or get dressed first thing in the morning, am I smelling good for someone else? No, it's for myself, right? But I'm in front of I'm doing great work first thing in the morning. Then and only then do I actually give myself that break, which is that that cold shower, and we'll come back to that whole cold shower and dopamine hit that you get from it, and so on and so forth. But so there's other stuff we can do in between, right? But yeah, that reassessment, I think that it's important for people to think, hang on, just because you think that you were a night owl before, is that really the case now with flexible working arrangements? And that's where I think that something like your tool would give them that data. Don't you think that they really need to do that assessment?
Yeah, 100%. I think that not only do we not objectively know, what time of day is often best suited to us, but we end up doing the wrong types of things at the wrong time of day. So it's very easy, even to know, okay, well, I'm a morning person, that's my ideal time, to hop up and get straight into your emails in the morning because that's the low-hanging fruit. And then by the time you get to that deep focus work, it's no longer the right time. And I think that's probably the biggest learning for me from using our own product, is that now I know that's my sacred time. So it's like, right, there is no emails, there's no low priority admin type tasks during this period. This is dedicated only to deep focus work. Then come 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when I know that it's starting to fade, then that's fine. I schedule all the meetings I want, then catch up on all the emails, but knowing that I've actually achieved what I need to for that day.
Yeah. And that's a great way to look at it. So the thing is that then when you actually do have those meetings later on in the afternoon, you get your boost of serotonin and oxytocin from being with other people, and then those are additional hormones that will kick in to actually sustain you and be able to do your second wind of work, right?
100%, 100%. And even being a morning person, it doesn't mean come 5 o'clock some days you're in the groove. Sometimes it's working for you. Not most days, but sometimes you are. And I think that you can ride with that as well. But I think that the most important thing for me personally is prior to understanding what we've just been discussing, is I'd get to the end of the day and feel unsatisfied and unfulfilled with what I'd accomplished. You'd think, oh, I felt busy all day, but geez, I actually didn't get what I needed to done.
Yeah.
And that's sort of not a satisfying feeling. So the goal of really being able to allocate times to getting that key work done, because it's the right time, generally means that come the end of the day, I'm like, right, I actually feel as I've achieved something today, I feel good about myself, and I'm motivated and ready to go again for tomorrow.
Yeah. And that's where I love that whole congruency in terms of what you present with your valuable equipment in terms of doing that assessment and data, and together with the accountability that an executive coach like myself can provide to them. Just because you know the information doesn't mean that you'll do anything with it, right? So it's that ability to have someone to actually come alongside and say, hey, now that you know, what are you going to do about it?
100%. That's even knowing the right thing to do. You shouldn't be eating chocolate at 10 o'clock at night, but it's very hard not to sometimes. So I think that having somebody to guide you through things, even though when you feel as though you have the right direction, is very important. it actually reminds me of some research I read years ago, which was on nutrition, and they gave people the opportunity to try and improve their diet. And there was 3 groups. There was one that was left to their own devices, one that had a professional dietitian, and one that had an automated robocall that rang and checked on them every day. And they got the same benefit from the robocall checking in as the dietitian ringing and checking in, just because that was their accountability.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, it wasn't a complex problem, but having someone to answer to or someone watching over them really helped them achieve it. And I think I even find that myself using our own product. Sometimes I'll see some feedback and I'll like, I know this is the right decision, but today I'll just do it this way. And you make the wrong decision at times.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue to, giving us the opportunity to talk a little bit more about your product. So tell us about Pylot. How did it come about? What is it, and what does it aim to do?
Yeah, so good question. So I guess that originally came about because I would sit here wondering if I'm fatigued or lazy, like I mentioned, and that led us on this scientific project to see whether we could answer that question. And as with most businesses, that project was far more challenging than I ever thought it would be. So we were eventually able to get to this point where we're able to monitor mental fatigue reasonably accurately and assess flow. And we validated a lot of those measures, interestingly, through competitive video game players, because that was a cognitive performance challenge that we could actually measure an outcome for, which is obviously very difficult to do for work. So now we're at the point of finally being able to launch the product, and we're really answering three key questions. So the first one is, what time of day do I work best? The second one is, how long should those deep work blocks should be? So as we just chatted about, in my instance, that would be, well, that's, the morning time is my best time of day to work. How long should my work blocks be before I generally start to fade? Well, for me, that's 90 minutes up to 2 hours. And then the third question is, well, what should I be doing right now? When do I need a break? Because it's all nice and well to plan, but not every day or every session's the same. So being able to have this live recommendation of, right, it is time to take a break, whether that's 30 minutes into a work block or 2.5 hours into a work block, makes me make sensible decisions. Because I've found personally that if I ever push to a point that I'm heavily fatigued, then I can ride off the rest of the day. So anytime I get that recommendation to take a break, I take it, because I know I can go and have a 15 or 20-minute walk or have a lunch break and come back and I'm ready to go again. Whereas if I push through that, you come back and it's a fight to get back into the groove of actually achieving something. So that's what we are at the moment, where, as I said, we answer those 3 questions. In terms of how we do that, I mentioned before, we have multiple sensors, so we're a wearable product, and we really just encourage users to wear Pylot where practically they feel comfortable. So if you're working at home, that's the majority of your day. If you're out seeing clients, then maybe that may not be suitable at all times. But over time, it gets enough data to build up this appropriate profile to give you useful insights.
And for people who are not aware, it's actually a wearable product that you put around your head, isn't it?
100%. So it's a wearable headband, which may sound unappealing, but it weighs about the same amount as a smartwatch, but it's just in a headband format. You really don't notice you're wearing it after a while. So it reminds me a lot of wearing headphones. Yep. You put them on and, a minute later you forgot they're on. And we need it to be in that form factor because we need to be able to measure brainwave activity from EEG. It's very light and comfortable for long periods. Yeah. It has about a 10-hour battery life. So if you were doing a big day of work, then you can get through a whole day. And then we just have an app on both Windows and Mac, which is providing live feedback and also learning from the data that it captures on you.
Yeah, and I'm sure that as the technology progresses and develops, and as well as wearable tech becomes more well adopted with people, that's going to see it be adopted. They see it to be commonplace with a lot more people. So I'm really excited about that space. I want to actually. So where are you at with regards to the device? Is it at launch phase? Where are you up to at this present moment?
Yeah, really good question. Hardware is very difficult in terms of development, where we go to external beta users next week, which is really exciting. We've obviously done rounds of research with real users, but now we're actually getting the real products in the hands of people who have pre-ordered it. And depending on their feedback and testing during that period, then we'll go to mass production. So at this point, we're looking at about January for a launch. So yeah, very soon.
Yeah, and without offending you, I'm assuming that we don't have to have a nice clean scalp like yours in order for.
Interestingly, yes, I had that question the other day. By making a demo video of myself. And then someone asking, do we need to be bald to use the product? And I said, no, that's just my genetic gift is having no hair. No, you can have hair. So the sensors themselves just sit along the forehead, the headband. So yeah, you can have as much hair as you want.
Yeah, and for people who are listening to this audio and not seeing the beautiful face of Ben and clean, nice head that he has, that's what we're talking about here.
Shiny, I think, is the
word. Brilliant. Hey, look, coming up to the end of our time together, I just wanted to quickly delve into a few major things that have come out of this particular discussion, which I think is really important. I guess from what you and I talked about, knowledge is key in terms of the information about people and themselves and how they work. I think that's really, really important, and we're absolutely congruent there. In fact, lots of things that we're talking about is absolutely congruent, right? So knowledge is key. Understanding how your body works and your mind works is so important. Understanding how to make it even better is really, really important, and really understanding when you need to actually take a break. Give yourself a bit of time to recover. We can't go at 100 miles an hour all the time and expect us to perform really, really well, right? And that speaks to a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment with executives in terms of how do they actually transition to a 4-day work week, but not at the sacrifice of productivity. And here's where something like Pylot may be able to give them that data to say, hey, you may be thinking that you're working really, really well 5 days a week, but in actual fact, you're not working as well as you thought you could. So if we could actually do that well over 4 days, what would life be like for you if you could actually only work 4 days a week?
100%. I think in general, we push ourselves too far, and that leads us to wasting a lot of our time performing at a suboptimal level. And so whether that's backing off by having an easier day each week, as you just described, or whether that means having easier periods throughout your day. I guess that depends on the person's preference and what suits their schedule, but 100% that's needed. I think breaks are the key to long-term success because they allow you to sustain intensity, and intensity means that you're able to get those deep focus works done, which is the key to good performance at work.
Yeah, and something that you mentioned before earlier on, which is that leads to the need for good sleep as well for that recovery, right? So I absolutely understand that. But one thing that I want to say, sorry to interrupt. I know that you're passionate about that sleep subject as well. One thing that I will say is that the day, here's the misconception that I'm trying to get across to a lot of people. The day that you take out of the office doesn't mean that you sit on the beach and do absolutely nothing. In my opinion, you need to really be investing in yourself on that day out of the office. So you're not doing work that's related to your role description or whatever work that you're doing. I believe that if you invest properly in yourself, right, in terms of your mental and physical well-being on that day, and as well as some form of professional growth or development that no one makes the time for these days. They're so busy being busy, they don't have time to develop themselves. And guess what? There's this little thing called AI and technology that's working in the background at this present moment that's going to start to do a lot of those things that they think that they're doing at this present moment, or they need to do at this present moment, right? So those are kind of some of the things of what I think that that people need to consider. And working in conjunction with myself and people like yourself in terms of understanding the information, that's absolutely paramount for them to have sustainable productivity and success.
Yeah, I really like that idea that, if you're working towards a 4-day work week, then your 5th day's not lounging around on the beach, but that's an opportunity to work on other aspects of yourself, which allow you to progress better longer term, while also giving you that break you need, in the short term to continue your short-term performance. So I think that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, I love that, Ben. I love in terms of what you are talking about in terms of that need to really understand, and I think that that's where wearable tech makes a big difference in people's lives. And I'm so glad that our paths have crossed. I'm looking and watching Pylot in anticipation in terms of where that's going to go. Yeah, really interested to just stay connected and see as to what we can do together potentially. So as a way to close, I'd like to give you the opportunity to share what is your one big tip on productivity. What's the one thing that you think that people can do right here, right now? If they're not wearing your device, which I think they should consider, and they're not working with an executive coach like myself, what's your one big productivity tip that people can take away?
I think, to me, as I mentioned a moment ago, then success at work's really about that deep focus work. So it's being able to allocate appropriate time on a daily basis to achieve your big goals. And that means not getting interrupted by emails or putting the phone away, and making sure that there's at least a couple of hours each day that you really got complete dedication to your key goals on a daily basis.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So that's a wonderful time with Ben Wisbey, and I love to actually get him to come back and chat with us a little bit further, a little bit down the track. Love to see as to how it goes with the launch of Pylot. But thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for the time that you spent with us and the tips that you've actually given us and the information. I'm really excited about this space as to where wearable tech is going to actually help with executives.
Thank you very much for your time, Ivan. Good to have a chat, and yeah, it was good to learn your views on things.
Great. All right. Thanks, Ben.